Hello and welcome to this video about 8 different ways to teach abroad. I'm Jamie from ESL Teacher 365, and I have taught abroad in several different countries and in many of the different ways that I will be talking about today. If you are thinking about teaching abroad, you aren't sure if it's right for you, or if you're just not sure what all the possibilities are like, then this video is for you. Let's begin with the first way. And if you have any questions as we go through the video, or if you are watching and catching up on the replay, feel free to leave a comment and I can always answer those questions afterwards. But if you are live and you have any questions as we go through, feel free to leave those questions in the comments and I will answer all of them at the end. So let's also share where you are watching from. I'm currently in near Brisbane, Australia. So let me know where you're watching this video from. I think last week's live, I had most people were from Canada, which I thought was interesting. Maybe it was just the time that I did it at, but I'm very curious to know where you're watching from today. So leave me a comment. But let's get right into all of the information. So when teaching abroad, I think people assume that you have to teach in a school. And yes, this is probably one of the most popular ways to teach abroad, but it isn't the only way, as you'll see today. There are 3 main types of schools. You have public schools, which are going to be government funded, private schools, privately funded, and you will find that sometimes these schools are also religious. And you also have charter schools, and charter schools are partially funded privately and partially funded from the government typically. I taught in Spain, and I actually taught in all 3 different types of schools, but in different ways. For schools, you can either apply to teach in these schools through a program, through an agency, or sometimes you can just apply to the school yourself. I'd say this is a lot more common for private and charter schools than for public schools, but it does depend on the country. And you'll probably hear me say that a few times today, but it really does depend on the country. Not all countries have every option to teach abroad and every way. So you do need to do a bit of research, or of course, you can always reach out to me for help. For schools, these could be elementary schools, high schools. Sometimes you will get the chance to work with young adults as well. I know some people want to teach abroad, but they don't necessarily want to teach kids. So there are ways to do that. Some schools have more of like a community college age or university level students that you can teach. Private schools, you also might have the opportunity to teach adults. There could be different ways. So that's probably the most common way to teach abroad. The second one would be teach abroad or language assistant programs. There are 2 kind of different ways to go about this. A language assistant program is where you are in the classroom, usually supporting the local teacher. That means that it's not necessarily your responsibility for behavior management, and they're dealing with the parents and any sort of safety issues, things like that. But you are there to support them and help them improve their English skills. I've found that through my experience teaching in language assistant programs, I didn't only teach English, I also taught other subjects. I taught science, social studies, and art. I had friends who taught philosophy, physical education. It just depended on our placement in our school and what they were looking for, what positions they needed help with. A teach abroad program, sometimes you'll see that different TEFL companies offer teach abroad programs either through a job placement guarantee, or they might have something called a TEFL internship. So usually what happens is you do your TEFL certificate with that company, and then they have a lot of different connections and they can help place you in that country. So you might be doing your TEFL course abroad, or you could do it online before you go. but these are usually paid. So you are paying to get that support that you need with the visa, with your placement. And I do recommend this if you're teaching abroad for the first time, you're feeling a bit nervous, you just kind of want everything set up for you. This can be a good option. Language assistant programs, sometimes you might receive some support with the visa process and housing and things like that, but I would say typically not. And the fees are going to be a lot less, or there's going to be no fee. So there's a little bit of a difference. I did language assistant programs, but I haven't done teach abroad programs. I didn't actually do my TEFL until I had been teaching abroad for 7 years. I was just teaching with my degree, my bachelor's degree, and then I do also have a US teaching license. Some of the most popular language assistant programs are in Spain, Japan, France has one, South Korea, there's one in Hungary, there's one in Georgia. There's a lot of different ones out there, but unfortunately, not every country has a teach abroad or language assistant program. But I do have a video on all of those that you can find on my channel. Okay, option number 3, language schools and academies. These are going to be typically after school hours, after work hours. Think of extra classes that people are using to supplement their English level and improve it. For kids, they might be taking some English at school, but maybe their parents want them to take an official English exam or just improve their English skills. So they will send them to language academies or language schools. For adults, it might be business English, it might be general English, and typically those after work hours and also weekends. So if you aren't a morning person, this can be a good option for you. Some language schools and academies will have morning classes too. It just kind of depends on their schedule and what they're looking for. But whereas you're working in a school or a language assistant program, those are typically like during school hours. Language schools and academies are weekends and evenings typically. For these schools, you will be working with smaller class sizes, which does make it nice for new teachers. If you're teaching in a public school, you could have 30 kids. In some of the Asian countries, you could have 50 students in a class, and it's super overwhelming. But in these smaller language schools, you could have a class of 15 or fewer students. Also, you're going to be teaching a variety of levels, a variety of ages, maybe some test prep, maybe some business English. So it's a really good place to kind of see what you like. Do you like working with young children? Do you prefer adults? Are you interested in teaching test prep? So test prep would be helping students prepare for official English exams like IELTS, TOEFL, Cambridge, maybe even PTE. And business classes, you might be teaching in these schools, or they might have a contract and they would be sending you to the actual companies to teach business English there. For these language schools and academies, they can be a little bit tricky to get into. It depends on the country. For example, in Europe, they typically only hire you if you already have EU working rights. But in Asia, you can apply to teach in these schools, or you can go through an agency. So it can be a little bit tricky just depending on where these schools are located. I taught at an English language school here, actually 2 of them here in Australia. And I really liked it because we have students from all over the world. I think in one of my classes, I had like 10 different nationalities. So it was very interesting whenever we had debates and discussions to see so many different points of view from all of my students. I did teach a lot of test prep, a little bit of business English, and some more creative classes. I also taught filmmaking for my students in English and a lot of general English as well. I taught pretty much every single level from 0 beginner up to advanced, and it was mostly adults, but there were also some kids classes too. So that is also something to think about if you don't really want to learn another language, but you want to teach abroad. Do consider English speaking countries. A lot of times that is still possible. I came to Australia on a work holiday visa and was able to teach in English language schools here. Okay. Our fourth option is international schools. International schools are a little bit different because it's not TEFL teaching. You're not typically teaching ESL. You are teaching whatever you're certified to teach. So this is an option if you have something like a US teaching license, Canadian teaching license, a QTS from the UK. You would need to be an actual certified teacher to qualify for these schools, or you could have something like a degree in education. Sometimes they're looking for a bachelor's in education or a master's in education, depending on the school and depending on the country. These are going to be K through 12 schools, not usually for teaching adults. And for example, my degree is in Spanish, but I was hired to teach preschool and first grade in Spain at an American school. So everything was in English. All of their subjects, except for obviously Spanish, was in English. And they did all of the different subjects. So I was responsible for teaching them math and science and reading and all of that kind of stuff. But this can be a really good option because it's a lot more stable than TEFL teaching. You'll find that sometimes when you're trying to teach ESL abroad, it's hard to renew your contract, or it's just, yeah, it can be a little bit unsettling. You're easier to get rid of. Whereas with these international schools, you typically have a 2-year contract. Sometimes there's a 1-year contract, sometimes there's a 3-year contract, and you get a lot more benefits like flight allowances, housing, different bonuses. And it will depend on where you're teaching, but this can be a really good way to save money and to further your teaching career. So I do recommend looking into international schools. For these schools, you can apply through different agencies. So there is Search Associates, there's International School Services, TES is a British one, Teachaway is another one. So I recommend going to those agencies' websites if you are a certified teacher, and they usually have job fairs. These job fairs start maybe January and go through maybe April. And if you attend these job fairs, you can get hired on the spot. You get to interview with a lot of different schools, and it's just good practice as well. But they really do tend to try and hire as many teachers as they can during these job fairs. So especially if you're a new teacher, this is a fantastic place to go if you're interested in international school teaching. Okay, number 5 would be universities. And this is another option if you're a certified teacher. They might be looking again for a teaching license, a degree, or master's in education. You may have more of a language assistant role, or you may be an actual kind of head teacher. I have a friend who taught in France in the universities there, and he had kind of like supplementary classes for his students. So it was all in English and he was in charge of it, but it was more kind of ESL style classes. And for these, you might actually not have very many hours. So this can be a good option if you're wanting to learn the local language, to travel, have more freedom and not be kind of, working all the time when you're abroad. So the pay might not be as high because you're not working as many hours, but that could be a good option for you depending on what your goals are. For these universities, you may have to reach out to the university or you may be placed through an agency depending on the country. I don't have any experience with universities. I've done teaching kids a lot. That was like 7 years I did teaching kids, and then 4 years teaching adults mostly, and then now online teaching kind of both. In company business classes, if you have any experience in business, this is, of course, a really good area for you. It might be a bit of an area of expertise for you, but if you don't have business experience, you can also teach business classes. I taught them way before I started my own business. I didn't really know what I was talking about, but that's not the goal. You're not necessarily teaching them the concepts and the content. You are helping them with different skills like preparing for meetings, writing business emails. You can do little mock projects of them doing project management or whatever you want to do. And there's usually going to be a textbook or a curriculum for you to follow. So don't feel intimidated by business English if you don't have business experience. But if you do have business experience, I would highlight that when you're applying to schools because it will be obviously a lot easier for you to get hired. For these types of classes, you're typically going to the company and you are working maybe one-on-one or small groups, or you may have quite a large group. It just depends on what your contract is. And these can be a little bit tricky because in businesses, you have times of the year where there's a lot more work, like end of financial year. They might not really want classes then. When things slow down, they might want more classes. So it can be a little bit sporadic. So just be aware of that. But of course, it depends on what your contract is and what your agreement is. You can be placed in these kind of in-company business classes through a private language school. Sometimes they will have a connection and they are selecting the teachers and then sending them out to the businesses, or you can reach out to the businesses yourself and set up any agreement that you would like. And yeah, this can be a bit challenging too, because you'll find that you have learners of many different levels and skill sets, and they're wanting to do different things. So if you are good at lesson planning and a bit creative, this can be really good. But if you're overwhelmed by that, it can be a little bit intimidating. Our seventh option is working as a freelancer or self-employed. And there's typically different visas for these. So it will be a freelancer visa or a self-employed visa. Some people who work as freelancers are actually going to be working at private schools or English language academies or teaching in businesses, but they are setting up all the contracts by themselves and they are usually working in multiple schools or with multiple businesses. So just think of kind of you are your own school and you're setting up these relationships and all your contracts and everything. What I have seen is people might start in a Teach Abroad program or a language assistant program, but then they decide to stay in the country where they're teaching and they see that moving to something like a freelancer or self-employed visa might be a better option just because it gives them a little bit more flexibility and freedom, allows them to teach exactly what they want to teach, work with who they want to work with. So yeah, that's usually kind of a next step. I don't recommend this if you're just starting out, but if you've taught abroad before and you're looking for additional options, do look into freelancer and self-employed visas. Finally, number 8 is for anyone who wants to teach online while abroad. I know that teaching online is becoming very popular, but it has changed a bit. No longer can you just teach for, VIP kid and travel the world. Now in 2024, it's a bit better to have your own online teaching business, and this can actually help qualify you for digital nomad visas. Each digital nomad visa is completely different. It depends on the country, but more and more countries are coming out with these visas each year. Typically, what you'll look at is the minimum threshold that you need to be making. Some countries have quite a low threshold. You might need to only be making 600 euros per month, for example. Some require $3,000 per month. Some require $10,000 per month. It depends on the country. and you might be paying into Social Security. You might have to pay some sort of self-employment tax. So I do recommend looking through all these different visas carefully and looking at your options. Digital nomad visas may be for as few as 3 or 6 months, up to 5 years, I think is the longest one right now. It will, of course, again, depend on which one you're applying for. But it can be a good option if you want to teach online and you want to travel around and have a bit more freedom. But these aren't made for hopping from country to country. They're made for staying in one country and living there for a while, but working online. And you'll need to establish your business first. You need to prove that you have a record of earning this amount of money per month in order to qualify. For digital nomad visas, you'll find that, because they're new, the process can be a bit confusing too. So you might need to get a lawyer to help you, but some of them are so new that the lawyers aren't even quite sure what to tell you yet. So it's a bit exciting, but can be a little bit tricky too. Okay, well, I am curious to know which of these ways you are most interested in teaching abroad, and share with me in the comments. And I do want to let you know that I am hosting a Teach Abroad Bootcamp on May 27th and May 28th. So this is for people who are interested in teaching abroad and you want to know exactly what the process is like. Or maybe you've been teaching abroad for a little while, maybe through a Teach Abroad program or language assistant program, and you want to go to a new place and learn what the process is like, then I recommend joining this bootcamp. It is 2 evenings from 5 to 7 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you can't make it live, I know right now with the end of school is very busy, you will get access to the recordings for up to a month afterwards, so you can catch up and ask me any questions during that month. If you are interested about learning more, you can go to courses.eslteacher365.com/bootcamp. This is the 3rd time that I'm running this bootcamp. I typically run it 1 or 2 times a year, so you'll want to jump in now. And it will share everything that you need to know, like visas, where to find jobs, what does it look like to move abroad, some of those logistics, what kind of finances do you need when you want to teach abroad, how to choose where to teach abroad. It really goes through everything. So if you are interested in joining the bootcamp, I highly recommend joining us when it's coming up on May 27th and May 28th. Okay, let's get to some questions. I will go through. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. Okay, let's see. So Natina says, how does one apply to work for the OET program? For example, should I apply for their specific courses on the OET website? So OET is the medical English exam. Students are going to be studying for this exam if they are nurses, doctors, dentists, in that kind of area. There are some courses on the OET website that you can do and you can get certified and things like that, but that's not always necessary. You'll find that some jobs will hire you for example, through an English language school. And if you have a medical background, they will allow you to teach their OET classes. Of course, it's going to be better if you have an understanding of the exam and how it works. So yes, I would kind of go through the OET website. There are some courses for teaching for the students to take that I've seen online, but not necessarily for the teachers. But yeah, it's always better to be prepared and be ready, but do know that it's not necessarily required because this is quite niche. All right. Daniel says, I like online best, no commute, no paperwork, no grading. Yeah, that's so true. But no grading for my online teaching, they're still, they're still grading. Let's see. Ava says, can certified Americans teach in Canada's elementary, secondary, or international schools? International schools, yes, definitely, because international schools are able to sponsor work visas for certified teachers. So that's kind of general throughout the world. If it's an international school, as long as you're certified, they can hire you. The tricky part will be for public schools. So I'm not sure what the process is for Canada. For example, for the US, if you want to teach there and you're from abroad, you have to look at the requirements for each state. It's completely different. Um, and for Spain to teach in the public schools, you have to take their public school exam. You have to get your degree kind of recognized by Spain, and it's like a years long process. So I would look into it, but it's going to be a lot easier to teach in those international schools than in public schools. International schools are typically private, and that way it's a lot easier for them to hire. Okay. Fatima says, is it different for non-native speakers with ESL certification and native ones, like all the ways in general? Good question. For non-native speakers, I'm going to say that you are eligible for many of the ways, but it depends on the country. For example, South Korea does not hire non-native speakers to teach ESL. China does not hire non-native speakers to teach ESL. You can teach other subjects, but you can't teach ESL. So while you might be able to teach in a language assistant program in Spain, you might not be able to do that in another country. So it is a little bit trickier for non-native speakers. You do need to look very carefully at the ways that you can teach in the countries that you're interested in, the eligibility requirements, and you just have to see what visas you are eligible for as well. And some countries that are a bit more non-native friendly are places like Thailand, Australia. Interestingly, I had a lot of coworkers that were non-native speakers. A lot of Latin American countries are going to be easier to access than places in Asia, for example. So yeah, you just have to kind of look a little bit harder, but it is possible to still teach as a non-native speaker. All right. If you have any other questions, let me know. And I do have a few questions that I get from my emails and DMs and all of that. So I'll go over kind of all of those. I do get a lot of questions about the pay. So which ways pay the best? Let me think about this. It's really going to depend on how many hours you're teaching, because if you're only teaching, 12 hours a week, but you're making quite a bit, that might still not be as much as if you're teaching 9 to 5 in an international school. You'll be making more, but you're teaching longer hours. But in general, I would say international schools pay quite well, universities. If you are doing your own thing as a digital nomad or a freelancer, it depends on kind of what you're charging and what your rates are. But those are probably the best paying ones. And schools, it can really just depend on what the school type is like and what the cost of living is like. It's a huge, huge range. Is the visa process the same for all of the ways? No, unfortunately. I wish it was just one visa if you wanted to be an ESL teacher, but it's not. For example, for language assistant or teach abroad programs, they are going to sponsor your visa. It's typically a student visa. Sometimes it's a work visa. For schools, you're usually getting a work visa or a work permit, something like that. For freelancing and self-employed, you need to apply for those visas, and that process can take a while. Digital nomad is a whole nother type of visa. There's also business visas if you're teaching business classes, or just if you're freelancing or you're self-employed. So there are many different kinds of visas. All right. Ava has another question. Which countries offer assistance with housing costs or apartment searches? This is more common if you're teaching in international schools, so that's when you're a certified teacher, or Asia. Asia, they typically are going to be helping you with either free or low cost accommodation, things like flights that are paid for, different bonuses, different benefits. Europe, you are typically breaking even. You're finding your own housing. In some cases, the school, you may be able to live on their campus. I have a few friends that were able to teach in France, for example, and then they had housing, kind of like boarding there for the students. And then they also had that for teachers, but I believe that they still had to pay a fee for that, although it wasn't very much. For Latin America, you're also going to be finding your own housing. In Australia, I had to find my own housing. Egypt had to find my own housing. So yeah, Asia and those international schools are going to be the main ones. Okay. Let's see. Any other one? So we did the visa process. Which way is best for teachers without a degree? All right. I know this is another common question because there's a lot of people without a degree who then realize they want to teach English abroad, and then they do find that there are a lot of barriers because of it. If you have an associate's degree, so not a bachelor's degree, there are some language assistant programs that will take you. Teach abroad programs, some of them will take teachers without a degree as well. I know there's one through International TEFL Academy for Barcelona. The Madrid one, you have to have a degree, but for Barcelona, you don't. And sometimes if you get a student visa to study the local language, you don't have to have a degree because you get working rights from that student visa. This is possible in Spain and Italy and some other countries, but that degree isn't required. So there's a few kind of workarounds. International schools definitely need a degree. For private language schools, Latin America is going to be the best option. So if you don't have a degree, countries in Latin America are usually not requiring a degree, and you can teach in different language schools or private schools without your degree. Universities are going to require a degree. Business classes, if you're going through an English language school, don't need a degree, depending on the country. And freelancer, self-employed, a lot of times they're kind of looking at your qualifications to see if you qualify for that visa. And if you don't have a degree, that can make it a little bit harder to get. Digital nomad, you probably don't need a degree. If you have your business and you are making enough income to hit that requirement, that's probably enough. All right. Which ways are more non-native speaker friendly in my view? Let's see. For non-native speakers, it really depends on the country. Yeah, I'd say it's not really the way, it's the country. So Thailand, for example, you can teach there as a non-native speaker. So I would look at all the different ways that are typical to teach in Thailand. Whereas South Korea, that's kind of not possible. In general, Latin America is going to be a bit more non-native speaker friendly. But again, you do have places like, the UK, Australia, English-speaking countries where there are non-native speaking teachers, but the issue is getting the visa, and that you usually need to have some sort of teaching license. You can get a skilled visa as a teacher. All right. Okay, so thank you so much for joining today. I hope that this was helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me through an email. I will write it down for you. So Jamie at ESLteacher365.com. So send through any questions that you have if you were here live today or if you are catching up on the replay. I'm always happy to help you with your Teach Abroad journey. And don't forget about our boot camp. If you are interested in teaching abroad, you want to learn more, you want to see if it's right for you, then this is a great low pressure way to join. And this is kind of a complement to a TEFL certificate. So if you're TEFL certified, that course taught you how to teach abroad. Not how to teach abroad, how to teach English. It taught you the different methods, lesson planning, all of that. But a lot of these companies kind of don't really help you with the teach abroad process, like what it takes to get the visas, where to look for jobs, all of that part, which is obviously very important when you want to teach abroad. So I would love to help you in the boot camp if you'd like to join. Thanks for joining today, and I will see you in our next live. Happy teaching. See you next time.